So this is the initial OrchidWIz start screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click my search orchid. That's typically what I do when I come into OrchidWIz. I click this search orchid button here. And that gets me into the orchid search window. And that's where I do most of my work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for Laelia purpurata. Okay, and which is now called Cattleya purpurata, so it's like one of the first ones to come up here. So I'm going to click on it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click, there's actually two places where I can click this. It's the same thing. There's a button here that's right next to the name, and then there's also a button down here that says names. I'm going to click this button down here that says names. And that's what's going to do is it's going to pull up all the names that Laelia purpurata has been known as. Everything that ties into the records for Laelia purpurata, it's pulling it up. So you see there's a Brasilaelia purpurata and Hydrolaelia purpurata and so on. Here's a Hydrolaelia purpurata form virginalis. There's a Laelia purpurata variety virginalis. And so what I would like you to do, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down. And when you scroll down, there's all kinds of horticultural forms. That's what the H.F means here. It means horticultural form, or in Latin, that would be hortus forma. And these are not taxonomical. What do I mean by this? Is that when they show up in nature, there's no viable population of these things in nature. So taxonomists will, they'll disregard these. It doesn't mean that they don't show up in nature, but when they do show up, it's like an albino rhinoceros. When it shows up in nature, it disappears. It's not like all the other rhinoceros are going to say, oh, we want to breed with the albino rhinoceros and then create a whole population of albino rhinoceroses. That doesn't happen in nature. And so if you don't have a viable population in nature, then taxonomists are not going to identify it. However, in a greenhouse for horticulturalists, when they see something like horticultural form Carnea, they'll say, oh, this is a beautiful color form, and so we're going to hybridize with it. We're going to create a lot more like this, and we can sell them for good money. And I'm going to click images here and bring these up. So these are the most popular color form in Cattleya purpurata is Carnea, okay? So what happens is people that grow Cattleya purpuratas, they'll have maybe a type form of Cattleya purpurata, and then they have other forms of Cattleya purpurata. So they'll say, oh, that's a beautiful color form. I want that one. What's that one? Is there a name to that one? And this is where people come up with a name to it. So Carnea, I think in Latin means the color of meat. Carne means meat. So Carnea is like the color of meat. Like Sangha means blood, and Sanguinea is the color of blood, and Cielo means sky, and Cerulean is the color of sky. So Carnea is just a name that horticultural people give to it. It doesn't mean anything taxonomically. So a taxonomist would just look at it and say, well, yeah, it's just another color form. It doesn't matter. What matters to a taxonomist is it a purpurata or not? But it's not like a viable population in the wild. So I'm going to teach you another little trick here. So you see there's my bar here where I scroll down through all the Carneas. If you would like, you can place your cursor below that bar all the way down here. And then when you click on it, it will scroll down 6 at a time. And so that way you're not dealing with this kind of scrolling down where sometimes it doesn't work very well. You can just look at the first 6 and then click, 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 and you're just doing 6 at a time. When you reach the bottom, it says, there's a button here that says next 60, because it only pulled up the first 60. So I can click next 60, and then you'll pull those up. And then again, I can just keep on clicking through them. And you see that even though these are very popular in Brazil, and that's how they showed up in OrchidWIz, because in Brazil they have tons of these things. They're also in the US as well. Here's a Cattleya purpurata horticultural form Carnea. Now that's not what the AOS called it. When they awarded it, they probably put Carnea in parentheses or something like that. They did denote that it was a Carnea, because otherwise I wouldn't have it. But if I click on it, I can click award. And so this is an AOS award to Carnea. spinnaker. This was awarded in 2002. So you know that these things have been around for a while. Now, again, this is not taxonomic. This is just an horticultural denomination. This Carnea, and you can call it variety Carnea or horticultural form Carnea, or I think the AOS now has been doing Carnea in parentheses. Okay, I call it horticultural form Carnea to denote that it's not a taxonomic denomination. Okay, so what other color forms are there? So Carnea is our most popular. It's followed by horticultural form Flammea. And if I pull those up, what are those? Those typically is where there's a lot of color suffusion that carried from the lip to the sepals and petals. Often that is associated with striations. So, but not always. You see, this one here is not very, it's hardly striated. It's not really striated much. And then you have some that are very striated, that are more striated, where the striations are more common. But there's also they also have an horticultural form striata that is different. So if you look at those, you say, well, what's the difference? Well, the striations are more predominant. So you see here, you don't call it a flammea, you call it because primarily what you see is the striation. So you're calling it a striata instead of flammea. Okay, that's just what they do there. You know, it's nothing taxonomic. It's just what they're calling it. And why is that? Because even though these things don't have viable populations in the wild, when you are a grower, you would like to have one of each. You know, if you're a grower, you'd like to have a Carnea, and you'd like to have a Flammea, and you'd like to have a Werkauserai. Now, Werkauserai is interesting. I don't know what the origin of the name is, but they appear to be like, there's no ceruleas. If I scroll down, I don't find any ceruleas. Okay, so it appears to be that the Werkauserai is a name that means for this particular species, it means the cerulia color form. So if it was another species, it would be horticultural form cerulia. But in the case of the purpuratas, the purpuratas are known as Werkauserai. So I can click images. You see, these things are beautiful, and I can scroll down through them. You know, and they look very different. And some of these actually have two variations in color, even though it's not noted here. Like, for example, this one here is both a cerulia and a striata. You see that it's cerulia and it's got striations, so it's a cerulia and striata. You know, so while others don't have that, you know, a lot of them have those, but like, let's look at this one here, for example. It doesn't have those striations. So they vary quite a bit. And now the Brazilians also started to, and you see, here's one from the Australian Orchid Council. So these things are spreading, you know, they've been around for decades, and they might have originated in Brazil, but they've spread all over the world, these kind of, you know, denominations. In some cases they have, so I'm going to go down through. So virginalis means alba when you're talking about purpurata. I don't know why that is. I mean, it's just the way it is. So in purpurata, you're not going to see a Cattleya purpurata horticultural form alba, and it will say virginalis. And it probably has to do with the fact that it appears that some were found in the wild, because here's an Hydrolalia purpurata form virginalis that's been written up by a taxonomist. And if you go down before that, in 95, that was 2004. In 95, there was a variety virginalis also written up by Menezes. And so these things were probably found in the wild and written up, and they were written up as virginalis. And so we don't have alba, we have virginalis instead. Okay, so that there's no alba in here. Then you have our sanguínea. Sangue means blood in Portuguese, and sanguínea in Latin, it's a Latin word. It means, I think it means kind of reddish color. But you see our sanguíneas, let's go back and look at our sanguíneas. It's just a very deep color, and some of them do look more reddish. Here's one that looks very, you know, it looks a lot more reddish than the others. So let's go back. So our sanguíneas have a very, very dark color compared to the type form for the purpurata. Here's a sanguínea awarded in Germany that looks like it has a lot of striations. It looks like a Flammea striata with lots of striations and a lot of color in the sepals and petals. So, you know, people will just call these things, and it's not. It varies. You know, there is nobody out there that has written a publication that says this is what a true sanguinea is, this is what a true Workhouseri is, this is what a true virginalis is. You know, they vary quite a bit in color. And even when you look at the virginalis, for example, you say, well, they're supposed to be white. Well, look at the difference in some of these color forms. This one here is what somebody might call an albescence, because it's not really pure white. As I scroll down, you know, some of them appear to be pure white, but a lot of those things that are being called virginalis, that come in as virginalis, you see, again, this one is not, that's not a pure white. It's almost white, but not a pure white. So, you know, it's not, it's just a way for, you know, to tell people that, okay, you know, somebody's growing these things. Okay, which color form do you have? Well, I want one of those. Okay, I would like to have a Workhouseri. I would like to have a Carnea. I'd like to have a Flammea. And taxonomists will look at it and they'll say, well, I don't care. There's no difference. I don't care. But the truth is there is a difference, and we can see the difference. I mean, when you look at these different color forms, don't you see a difference? I mean, there's an obvious difference. Now, why does this happen with the purpurata? And for example, it happens with a lot of other cattleyas. Like, let's take a look at Walkeriana, for example.
Alex, does it happen in other things besides cattleyas, or is this really a phenomena within that group?
This happens primarily within the cattleyas, and I'll show you, and that's a really good question. I'm going to show you something else in a little bit that, you know, to address that question. But here's our Walkeriana. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on names, okay? And you see that for Walkeriana, there's some varieties that have been recognized out in the wild, but I don't see any that are specific to color. I don't see any color forms that have been recognized out in the wild. So Walkeriana, there's a type form for Walkeriana. Here's one growing out in the wild on a cliff. It kind of looks like this. This is the regular color form for Walkeriana. So then you say, okay, so what are the most popular color forms beyond that? The most popular color form, and we have 100 photographs of this color form in OrchidWIz, it appears to be the most popular color form is semi-alba. So let's look at those and see what they look like. Well, again, they don't exactly all look the same. Now, I would say this is a typical semi-alba over here. It just means that it has color on the lip, but it doesn't have, it's an alba it's an alba in the other segments, but on the lip, it's got color, so it's called a semi-alba. Now, these things are so popular in Brazil that when I first was getting them, they would say Cattleya walkeriana, and then they would say S/A. And I didn't know what S/A was. I had to call somebody in Brazil and say, well, what is this S/A? And it was an abbreviation for semi-alba, because they're just so common that people just abbreviated them, and they would just say S/A, and so that would be semi-alba. And so I kept finding that all the time. I couldn't figure out what that was, but that's what it means. It's a semi-alba. So you see, that's a typical semi-alba over here. But again, some of these are going to be slightly different, because if you look at this one, this would be semi-albescens, I would call it. If I was going to call it, I was going to call it semi-albescens, because it's semi-alba, but here it's albescens, it's not alba. So I would call it semi-albescens. I don't know if that denomination exists, but that's what I would call it. This one here is a semi-alba, but it's not just semi-alba, it appears to be cerulean as well. So I would probably call that a semi-alba cerulean. And in some cases, they have started to give several different color denominations combined in the same orchid. So what else do we have for walkeriana? Well, we have the ceruleas, which here, again, this is not Workhouseri. Purpurata would be a Workhouseri, and you'd have a very deep purple color. Here, the ceruleas are a very light color. They're a very light color. Almost all, I don't see a cerulea that's really dark on this list. Maybe some of them, and you don't really know if that's maybe the photograph. Some of them are a little bit darker than others. But cerulean is our second most popular color form. And then you have your albas, which are albas throughout the entire, and I have 66 photographs of that. Most of these are awarded in Brazil, but of course you're going to have some awarded. Here's one awarded by New Zealand Orchid Society. Here's one awarded by the Australian Orchid Society. So these are supposed to be completely white throughout. So they're not just semi-alba, they're completely white throughout the flower. Again, they're not viable populations of these in the wild. These are just horticultural denominations. But people want them, people like them, and so we need to have a way to refer to that, to refer to them, identify them somehow. Now, with regards to the question, is this just for Cattleyas? We're seeing that a lot in Cattleyas because I get thousands and thousands of photographs from Brazil, and in Brazil, that's what they do, okay? Now, what about, let's go look at our most popular dendrobium here in the United States. Can you guess what our most popular dendrobium is? Let's go look at that. Now, in Australia, it would be different, but here in the US, you see what I did here is I clicked on all genera over here. I brought up all the different genera. So that's our Phalaenopsis, Paphiopedilum, and so on. I'm going to go down to Dendrobium. And our most popular dendrobium grown in the US is this one. It's Cuthbertsonii. Now, if I look at show all photographs of Cuthbertsonii, there are many, many different color forms. And these are not identified by taxonomists, and they're not identified by as different color forms by horticulturalists either. Nevertheless, I would tend to guess, I mean, that's just my guess, that people that grow these things will want to grow different colors of them. And so they'll say, oh, I have one that's white, and I have one that's pink, and I have one that's orange, and I have one that's reddish. I have one that's bicolor, that has two colors in it, and bicolor, and there's bicolor orange red, and there's bicolor pink and lighter pink, and so on. And he said, well, why does that not show up here? Because we're not in Brazil, part of it. Why does that not show up here? And the answer is, it is beginning to show up. So let's go back to my profile. Oh, actually, let's bring that up. I'm going to click profile. So that's profile. You see 303 awards that I have in OrchidWIz. It's incredibly popular, especially in places like San Francisco. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click names from my profile page. I'm going to click names, and it's got lots of names here. It's been it's been written up as many different things, but they're all Cuthbertsonii. So when I scroll down to here, I say, okay, so what color forms do I have? You see that some photographs started showing up with color forms. So there's this horticultural variety, Agathodium. I don't know what this one is, but I got some photographs from someone for this particular, looks like a color. It looks like a color, but they say horticultural variety. So I would tend to think it's more than just color, but I don't know what that is. But then I go down to the next one. I've gotten 3 photographs that say horticultural form bicolor. And then I say, okay, well, what's an horticultural form bicolor? Let's look at it. And you see, actually, they don't look the same. Here's one that's bicolor, that's orange and yellow, and here's one that's bicolor, that's pink and very light pink or white. Okay, so there's not really. They've started to show up. Here's a semi-alba. They've started to show up, but it's not common. So I would say in the Cattleyas, it's very common. In other groups, it's not quite as common. You might have an alba form, there might actually be a true form alba identified in the wild that people will grow, and maybe a form cerulean and so on, but it's not as common in other groups as it is in the Cattleya. Will it be in the future? Probably, because when people go and buy Dendrobium Cuthbertsonii from a vendor, they'll often say, hey, I want the white one, I want the pink one, I want the orange one. Well, if that's the case, then why don't we have a way to identify them, instead of just saying, hey, I want I want that white one over there, I want that orange one over there. There should be some way for us to identify those things. But so far, we're not seeing that. Here's an horticultural form roseum that somebody, sent in a photograph for that. But we're not really seeing that to the same degree. So
can you search at the orchid search screen for all your albas and get all of the horticultural forms that are alba?
Right. So when you're in Search Orchid, if you'd like to find things that are horticultural form alba and say, okay, what species have an horticultural form alba in OrchidWIz, you can just simply type h.f type alba in here, containing. Okay, so containing, name containing horticultural form album, search. Okay, and now it brings up all of the species in OrchidWIz that have an horticultural form alba. So you see here's Ancilia africana horticultural form alba. Then you can click names. And let's see what that looks like. Oh, there's 9 of them. So I'm going to click horticultural form alba for Ancilia africana, and this is what they look like. So they look yellow, and yellow is often the alba form in orchid species.
Is your names button basically reference use? I mean, is it Q's monocot list? It looks the same. When you go to your names, are you really seeing like Q monocot?
Yes, you're really seeing Q list of monocots. Now, in certain cases, like let's say that one orchid that was hybridized like crazy in the 1800s was Cattleya canhamiana, or at the time it was known as Cattleya canhamiana. And so it got lots of names. So if I type canhamiana in here, all right, so let me type canhamiana, and there's Cattleya. It's now known as Cattleya canhamiana. It used to be Cattleya canhamiana, and the difference for that is that it used to be Cattleya mossii with Laelia purpurata, and now it's just Laelia purpurata became Cattleya purpurata. So now it's just known as Cattleya canhamiana. Now, let's click names for this particular hybrid, and you see that I come up with lots and lots of names for Cattleya canhamiana or Cattleya canhamiana. It has lots of names. So you say, why would that be? Why does it have so many names? It has so many names because back in the 1800s, the naming was more fluid. You know, people would write a letter to Frederick Sander and say, hey, you know, I had this, I registered this thing, and maybe they didn't even write a letter. They would just call it. They would cross it and call it, hey, you know, I have a new cross. Now, why did it get crossed so much? Why did canhamiana get crossed like crazy and get all these different names? You know, like Edouard André and Fastuosa and Galpin and Madame Waller, all of these names. Why did it get all these different names? Just out of curiosity, because you look at the profile and you say, okay, so it's Mossii purpurata. Let's click on Mossii. When does it bloom in the Northern Hemisphere? In the Northern Hemisphere, when does it bloom? May, June, okay? That's when Mossii blooms in the Northern Hemisphere. Now let's look at purpurata. When does it bloom in the Northern Hemisphere? May, June. So everybody was crossing it. They bloom at the same time. They were side by side. So everybody was doing that cross. Okay, so it just means, you're right, in the case of species, it's Q. If it's a hybrid, it's coming out of the RHS.